The city had learned to shout. It shouted with horns and sirens, with advertisements blaring from screens, with the clatter of construction and the endless arguments that spilled out of open windows. Even the people seemed to move loudly, their footsteps hurried, their voices sharp, their eyes fixed on whatever came next. In this loud world lived Samira, who had discovered early on that softness could feel like a mistake. She worked at a small customer service desk tucked into the corner of a government office, the kind where people came already upset. They arrived carrying folders thick with paperwork and grievances heavier than the files. Samira listened to complaints about lost forms, delayed approvals, unfair rules. Most days, the anger came first, words flung like stones. She had learned not to raise her voice in response. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, spoke gently, and asked questions that slowed the moment. It wasn't a strategy she'd been taught, it was simply who she was. Still, colleagues teased her. "You'll never survive here being so soft," they said. Samira smiled and kept listening. On a winter morning when the sky hung low and gray, a man arrived at her desk with a storm already breaking across his face. His name, according to the card he slapped down, was Imran. He was older, his coat thin, his hands trembling with cold or something deeper. Before Samira could greet him, he began shouting about a pension payment that hadn't arrived. His voice cut through the office, drawing glances and sighs from other desks. Samira waited until he paused to catch his breath. Then she spoke quietly. "I'm sorry this has been so stressful," she said. "Let's look at it together." Her tone startled him. He seemed almost offended by the lack of resistance. "I've looked at it," he snapped. "No one helps. They just tell me to wait." She nodded, acknowledging the frustration rather than dismissing it. She asked for his documents, spreading them neatly on the desk. As she worked, she explained what she was seeing, translating bureaucratic language into something human. Her voice stayed soft, steady, even when he interrupted, even when he muttered insults under his breath. It took time. There was an error, small but impactful, a number typed incorrectly months ago. Samira filled out a correction form, flagged it for urgent review, and wrote her extension number at the bottom. "If you don't hear back by Friday," she said, "call me directly." Imran stared at the paper as if it might disappear. His shoulders dropped. "You're the first one who actually listened," he said, quieter now. His eyes glistened with something like relief. He left without another word, but he paused at the door and nodded once, a gesture that felt heavier than thanks. Samira didn't think much of it. She returned to her work, to the steady rhythm of soft words in a loud place. But kindness has a way of echoing. Across the city, Adil was learning how noise could drown out thought. He drove a delivery truck, weaving through traffic for hours, deadlines ticking loudly in his head. Every delay felt personal, every red light an accusation. That afternoon, he nearly collided with a cyclist who swerved unexpectedly. Adil slammed his brakes and leaned on the horn, shouting through the open window. The cyclist shouted back. Other drivers joined in, a chorus of anger rising in seconds. As the noise peaked, a woman stepped between the truck and the bike. She raised one hand, not aggressively, just enough to ask for a pause. "Everyone's okay," she said calmly. "Let's all take a breath." Her voice didn't match the chaos. It was low, almost tender. The effect was strange. The cyclist lowered his fists. Adil felt his chest loosen, embarrassment replacing rage. The woman checked the cyclist for injuries, then stepped aside. Traffic resumed, quieter than before. Adil drove on, unsettled by how easily his anger had dissolved at the sound of one soft voice. Later that evening, he told his wife about it. "She didn't shout," he said, puzzled. "She didn't blame anyone. She just spoke like everything could be okay." His wife smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." At a school on the edge of the city, Miriam sat in the back of her classroom, invisible by design. She had learned that being quiet kept her safe. The louder students dominated discussions, mocked mistakes, laughed too freely. Miriam's grades slipped not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't dare to speak. One day, the teacher announced a group presentation. Panic spread through Miriam's chest. She was assigned to a group with two outspoken boys who immediately took over. They dismissed her suggestions without listening. On presentation day, Miriam stood at the back, hands shaking, prepared to say nothing. As the boys rushed through their slides, the teacher noticed Miriam's silence. After they finished, she turned to Miriam and said gently, "I'd love to hear your thoughts too." The room was loud with whispers and giggles. Miriam's throat tightened. The teacher waited, patient, her expression encouraging. When Miriam finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, but it carried clarity. She pointed out a mistake in the data, explained a connection the others had missed. The room grew still. The teacher nodded. "Thank you for sharing that," she said warmly. That was important. For the first time, Miriam felt that softness could be strength. That being heard didn't require shouting, just someone willing to listen. The threads of these moments wove together in ways none of them could see. On Friday afternoon, Imran returned to the office, this time with a small box of sweets. He asked for Samira by name. When she appeared, surprised, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "My payment came through," he said. "I wanted to say thank you." She accepted the box with a smile. "I'm glad it worked out." As he left, Samira's supervisor, who had often criticized her gentle approach, watched thoughtfully. Later that day, when a woman arrived in tears, shouting about an eviction notice, the supervisor didn't intervene as usual. Instead, she nodded to Samira, letting her handle it. She noticed how the room seemed to quiet around Samira's desk, how anger softened into conversation. That evening, Samira took the bus home. It was crowded, loud with music leaking from headphones and arguments over seats. An elderly woman stood gripping a pole, swaying with each turn. No one noticed until Samira stood and offered her seat. "Please," she said softly. The woman smiled with relief. "Thank you, dear." A man nearby, who had been arguing loudly on his phone, paused and lowered his voice. A small shift, barely noticeable, but real. Kindness rarely announces itself. It doesn't trend or demand applause. It moves quietly, like water finding its way through cracks. Weeks later, Samira received a call from a community center asking if she would volunteer for a listening program, helping people navigate paperwork and life challenges. They had been given her name by someone who said she had a gift. Samira hesitated, doubting herself, then agreed. On the first day, she sat in a small room with mismatched chairs. People came with stories heavier than forms, grief, confusion, fear. Samira listened. She didn't fix everything. She couldn't. But she gave each person her full attention, her voice a steady presence in their storm. Outside, the city continued to shout. But inside that room, something different grew. People left standing a little straighter, breathing a little easier. Some came back, bringing friends. Adil delivered packages to the community center one afternoon. As he waited for a signature, he overheard Samira speaking to an anxious young man. Her voice was familiar. It stirred something in him. When she finished, he said, "You have a calming way about you." She smiled. "Thank you." He nodded, thoughtful. On his next shift, when traffic snarled and tempers flared, he found himself lowering his voice, choosing patience where anger had once lived. Miriam, now more confident, joined a debate club encouraged by her teacher. She still spoke softly, but people leaned in to hear her. They learned that volume wasn't the same as authority. The world didn't suddenly become quiet. There were still sirens, still shouting, still days when softness felt fragile. But in pockets of the city, in offices and classrooms and streets, a different rhythm took hold. A soft voice in a loud world doesn't silence the noise. It changes how people listen. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.